Good afternoon, good evening. I am Andy Smith. I am the Rolls-Royce co-chair of the Rolls-Royce Multi-Faith Network. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what that actually means. When I call it multi-faith, that means different things to different people. It's strictly speaking, in the context in which it's actually applied in Rolls-Royce, it's more of an interfaith network in that it's just different faiths and we're sort of working together. And it operates as an umbrella over all the different faith groups. So all the different faith groups still operate as they did prior to the multi-faith network existing. So Christian workplace groups, they existed 37 years ago when I joined Rolls-Royce, and they will still exist in years to come after I have left. But the multi-faith network provides an umbrella for Christian workplace groups, as indeed for the other faith groups in the company. So next slide, please, Ross. So, so we've been going for almost 7 years now. In fact, back in June 2016, that's when someone called Ros Turner, she was then, she's now Ros Loker now, came to Rolls-Royce, and she came to one of the Christian workplace groups there, and she spoke about getting ourselves officially accredited in line with how other groups are, LGBTQ, gender, etc. I don't think she got any great traction in June 2016, to be honest. But then she came back again in October 2016. And for some reason, I felt that was a very good idea, what she was talking about, and somebody ought to do something about that. And I rapidly realized that person was probably actually going to be me. So that's where it already started. So back in October 2016, I started initial discussions within the Christian community, because that seemed the obvious place to start. And we agreed that was how we should proceed. And then December 2016 to January 2017, we approached the company. In February 2017, I actually managed to connect with other faith groups, which was a prerequisite from the company to start something, because the company Rolls-Royce wasn't prepared to endorse a employee resource group, as we called them. That was our very specific faith. It had to be multi-faith. Well, we've got a working party set up. Transform UK provided us with lots of very helpful information on getting charters together, etc. We got our working party to create our chart and do the supporting documents. That was brought off in May 2017, so that's over 6 years ago now. And then in September 2017, we had a launch event with external speakers and approximately 200 attendees, which was quite remarkable to get that from zero to going in less than 12 months. Next slide, please. So when it comes to actually running something like a network, you need to think about who you actually have in what roles. So these are we call them global inclusion networks now. We've gone from employee resource groups to global inclusion networks as a rebranding. So it's obviously something that's going on quite a bit these days. But you need to think about having a chair, deputy chair, finance, membership, strategic partner, events, education, communications lead, etc. But then when it comes to the multi-faith network, we have created an extra role, which are faith leads. And that's very specific to the multi-faith network. And each faith lead is responsible for promoting their respective faith. So they organize events relating to their faith. So we have lunch and learns. When we have events, they're the ones who are responsible for recommending speakers, etc. And that's actually quite helpful, because it helps to protect the group. Because if there is a faith that isn't being represented, and someone from that faith says, well, why haven't we got a speaker for my faith here? Answer is, well, we don't have a faith lead for your particular faith. Are you interested in taking on that role? Usually they then go away, unfortunately, but but at least it helps us to keep that sort of going. But anyway, one of the things that we do have is very good support within the company. So I have somebody on the Rolls-Royce executive leadership team who is actively involved in this. So we have our CEO, and then his executive leadership team are underneath. And if I have an issue, which I haven't so far really, I can go straight up the command chain directly to them. We also have a global head of diversity and inclusion. And as I say, the all inclusion networks then sit under a global inclusion network, and we all have equal footing on that. Next slide, please. So what is the Multi-Faith Network? So its purpose is to raise awareness of various faiths and beliefs through dialogue, education, and social events to help create a more diverse and inclusive Rolls-Royce. So if you think about it, the reason people are generally wary of people from any sort of faith really is because they just generally don't know what they believe, who they really are, or understand them. So we try to help people understand that by visiting places of worship, promoting various religious festivals which we celebrate. We've been involved in STEM activities in faith schools and with disadvantaged children. Also tried, we've also engaged in community support and recruitment and campaigns, and done charitable work to support various crises. And we also held an annual conference as well, which we must do every year. So just broadening out a bit on that, so expanding on those points. So again, we've sort of top left, we visited a mosque on raising faith awareness. I think we visited places of worship. We've been to a Gurdwara and other places like that. We've also done engagement through faith celebration. So one thing that we have been able to do in the last 7 years, which we never did in the previous 30 years I was in the company, is able to run a real specific Easter celebration. And we've been able to do that in Bristol, we've been able to do that in Derby. Prior to that, all we did was a little carol service every December prior to that. So our ability to, as Christians, to express ourselves within the workplace has significantly improved in the last 7 years, thanks to MFM. The other thing that we also have been promoting is quiet rooms, faith-friendly workplaces. So I mean, tranquility rooms, whatever it is, they are multifunctional rooms, but they can be used for prayer as well. So we're also promoting those within the company. Next slide, please. So yeah, so when it comes to celebrating major events, we've done it with Christian Easter parties. We did Chinese New Year, which we did as a joint event with our East group. I mean, on the right it says Eid Mubarak, which is is blessed Eid for people, for Muslims. And the top central and the left-hand image, one of the things that Hindus do in Diwali is they like these coloured powders which they make images out of. The one on the left is particularly pleasing because that's a HP turbine blade sitting on top of a HP turbine disc with a cover plates and a rim sealing device in there as well. So as an engineer in that area, that's very impressive and very well drawn. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of faith rooms on all sites, we've been sort of engaging with the what does good look like in terms of faith rooms. Some of them were not ideal. They're very sterile, white walls. It doesn't lend itself to feeling very at peace in there. This is a particular standard that has been developed, and it's actually called a tranquility room. It's got this very nice verdant sort of green forest scene in there, the scattered light. There's facilities with Bibles, Qurans, prayer mats, seating. Even I'm actually modelling the nice comfy seat whilst reading a Gideon Bible, which the Gideons very kindly provided for us. I will point out that these things these things can take time to appear, though. The gentleman in the middle is the person who raised the requisition to create not the one that you have the internal images, but a different faith room. Unfortunately, he actually retired and he came back as a visitor to actually take part in the inaugural opening of it. But at least we get there. So that was always good. Next slide, please. So the MFN annual conference is the big thing that we do each year. We've done it every year since we launched in 2017. So top left, that's the speaker at the launch meeting. That was a chap talking about, sorry, that was a Muslim talking about issues around Islamophobia. In 2018, we had a theme on being inspiring, and we had on the top right there a chap called Ravi Singh, who heads up an organization called Khalsa Aid. And then in 2019, in the bottom left, we were considering the subject of sustainability. So we had scientific company representatives and quite a few faith people there, or people of different faiths, talking about sustainability as well. Next slide, please. So then in 2020, obviously the pandemic had hit. So 2017 to 2019, we were doing it in person, as you saw in the images. Lots and lots of people were there. We always put on food at the end as well, and it was a free meal. But in 2020, 2021, we had to go virtual. And 2020, our theme was living with uncertainty, which seemed rather apt in 2020, with the pandemic in full flow there. And 2021, we took a theme on bringing humanity together. And we had a number of speakers, but what was interesting is that in the first 2017, 2018, we actually didn't have a Christian speaker. But since 2019, we've always had a Christian speaker, and they've always been exceptionally good at what they did and how they came across. And in 2021, we had Pastor Mick Fleming, who runs Church on the Streets up in Burnley. He's actually now Bishop Mick Fleming, as he came back in 2022 to talk about servant leadership. And if anyone knows about servant leadership, it was him, and the work and the amazing work he does. If you ever get an opportunity to get hold of his personal book and story, I would strongly recommend it. It's a very powerful read. So yes, I think that covers that quite well. Next slide, please. And yeah, just going back to some of the other ones. So we always advertise when Ramadan is on, and we always pick a day during Ramadan where we do a fast challenge, so people actually follow the fasting plan of between sunrise and sunset. They don't eat or drink, and they're also encouraged to make a charitable contribution. So we raise some money for charity doing that as well. The next stuff is covered on the next slide. So next slide, please. So when obviously everything was going on with Ukraine, well over a year ago now, we decided to help raise money as part of the Ukrainian humanitarian appeal. If you ever come to Derby, one thing you are pretty well guaranteed is being able to find a good curry here. But the other thing as well is that if you want to make friends with colleagues, a box of samosas goes down very well. There's lots of places that sell and make very good, excellent samosas, and we bought. There's a place near where we work, and we bought thousands of them. I mean thousands of them, and we sold them on recommended £1 each, and we raised £4,300. So some people paid more than the £1 each, but we raised lots of money for that. And there's activities like this. It just helps to promote faith generally within the workplace. Next slide, please. So from a Christian point of view, certainly we were able to celebrate hope in Derby. So that was the resurrection with the stone rolling away from the tomb, and then he is risen on at Bristol as well. Yeah, I think I've talked more or less on those. Otherwise, yes. So next one, please. And then so we had so you would find that Christians, Muslims are the two strong faith groups in Rolls-Royce. Then you got the Hindus, then you got the Sikhs, or Sikhi faith. So we had a lunch and learn from, which was hosted by Jits, who was the Sikhi faith lead, and yes, it was interesting to hear what do Sikhs believe, and I think that's if you want to engage with people of other faiths, it helps if you understand what they believe, where they come from. And so I always find that very helpful. Next slide, please. Then, of course, back in 2019, in New Zealand, around like February time, I think it was, and then there was an attack on Muslims, and then in May, on Easter Sunday, there was the bombing of the church in Colombo in Sri Lanka, and we organised a remembrance around. That's the statue that's sticking up. That's Sir Henry Royce statue that sits outside the main Rolls-Royce building here in Derby. And we had people gathered, and we had the Rolls-Royce Christian chaplain pray. I said a few words, and it was good to be able to, for people to be able to feel they could come together and actually do that, and be able to share this on, as an article in the Rolls-Royce weekly news drop. Next slide, please. And then one of the other things they do in Rolls-Royce is they have this theme called being like me stories. So people from all the different resource groups are able to share their own personal stories. Quite a few members of the Faith Network have done that. Now, I was able to share my story on the challenges I had when my son was first born. And certainly at the time, last time I checked, over 2,400 people had viewed it, which was quite remarkable. I had a lot of people feed stuff back to me, that they read it and stuff. So it was very encouraging. And I say it's the opportunity that people have to share personal stories just opens up conversations with people in ways which just weren't happening 10 years ago. If you're going to do work on a Monday morning, what do you do over the weekend? Well, most Christians probably wouldn't mention that they went to church, but I've had Christians telling me now that they feel more comfortable saying who they are on what they did over the weekend. Now that we've got the network going, and it's seen as more as an accepted mainstream alongside all the other resource groups, which is really, really encouraging. Next slide, please. Is that 16? Yes. So one of the other things, so we do like to do activities with other employee resource groups. Our colleagues in the US, they have a Black employee network. They wanted to do something on meditation. They reached out to us to ask if we have different faith perspective on meditation. So we did a Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim perspective on meditation on that. So which is quite an interesting, quite interesting to hear just really how different it is. But so many into emptying the minds, whereas obviously Christians, our focus is on Jesus and Holy Spirit and directing us through those things. So that was quite an interesting contrast. Next slide, please. So through all of this, I've then ended up found myself being a part of the faith-friendly workplaces group, where we're obviously looking to promote faith within the workplace, and right at the very start, we were actually able to connect with the Multi-Faith Centre at Derby University, who's been doing real pioneering work in this area. In fact, the very first speaker at the very first annual event was the director of the Multi-Faith Centre at the University of Derby, and through the connections that I've had with them, we've been able to get them on board with the faith-friendly workplace initiative as well, and they've been running some interns and doing some studies looking into this. Yes, how would you define your organisation in relation to faith? Is it faith avoiding? The topic of faith is not only is it not discussed, it's discouraged. Is it a faith-based organisation? So is it an Islamic school? Is it a church, etc.? Is it faith-safe? So you permit things, but you don't actively encourage it? Or is it faith-friendly, that you actually promote and encourage people to express who they are? And how is that all done? What are the frameworks? Is it through organizational culture, HR policies and practices, or even is the physical environment actually something that supports and encourages people? Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. So it's not plain sailing. You will always you will hit issues that you probably wouldn't even have thought you would hit. But one of the things that the studies came out with, and when I looked through them, I could pretty well recognize every single one of them in my own experience. So that was actually very good. But in terms of things, so in terms of getting going, well, it takes committed leadership to get going. I mean, it was something that I wasn't thinking about, but when I started thinking about it, I became quite passionate about it. So it takes committed leadership to get it going. My fellow chair, Shaq, he's been highly committed in this as well. We've been doing this with no additional pay, but it has taken extra time to do this work. And obviously potential issues can arise, so you do need to make sure that there are safeguards in place for this. So what sort of issues could arise, and what that you would need to safeguard against? Well, time and resources is obviously a clear one. You know, all employees are busy across all companies, so finding time to support community requests is challenging. You will, if you're involved in something like this, you will learn that the number of requests you get far exceeds the time and ability you have to support them. So you sometimes have to be circumspect as to what you do and don't support. There are certain types of requests where can you just stand by a table during lunchtime? People don't come up to you and talk to you when they're having lunchtime. They go and talk to the mates. So the type of requests, you need to look at it carefully and just say, is this really going to achieve anything or not? So if it's meeting new graduates, meeting new interns, meeting new apprentices, is it being done in just some sort of ad hoc way, or is it actually properly diaried into the event that's happening? Lack of incentives. So yeah, so obviously if there's lack of incentive, it does reduce motivation to take part in lead networks. And I think in particular, the first generation of people involved in these things are often highly motivated, but then you need to get the next generation, you need sustainability on that. And that often hinders engagement and progress. We have noticed a number of networks are starting to reach out to recruit people, and it's not easy to get hold of that. Get hold of people, certainly in the current moment, anyway. But the other problem is conflicts of interest, and I've experienced both of these myself. So network leaders can be criticised for promoting their own faith by other faith groups, which is obviously a fairly standard one. But then network leaders can be criticised for promoting other faiths by their own faith groups. So as I mentioned, at the launch meeting and the follow-on annual review, we didn't have a Christian speaker, and some of the Christians were asking me about this, and we said, look, we're in this for the long haul. You can't have every single faith represented every single year. It will balance out, don't worry, trust me. And it has done, it's done well. But as I say, the biggest way you can safeguard against a lot of that, and certainly in a multi-faith network anyway, is making sure that you have as broad a representative committee as possible. But obviously that might not be practical. Then make sure you have clear communication on the decisions that you make and why. Yes, and that, it's just a case of it's often just education that people might focus on something specific and say, well, if in the grand scheme of things, we have to do, if we're doing this then, we did that then, we're doing this faith then, and so on. So it's just making sure that people are aware that is a wider, bigger picture on this than it's just what's happening locally and right now. So that concludes what I've prepared. So hopefully you found that helpful.